Dan Tom here with MMA Junkie, and I wanted to speak to a professional ahead of UFC 249. Of course, the adjusted UFC 249 on May 9th. We have Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje in the main event. Of course, Tony Ferguson will be doing back-to-back weight cuts, so I wanted to speak with Mike Dolce, who you can find on Twitter at The Dolce Diet. Of course, his website, thedolcediet.com. Mike, thank you for joining me today.
Dan, happy to be here, man. Once again, it's always good to see you and talk MMA.
Yeah, not in the normal studios as we're accustomed to, but we both got our setups here, and so let's break down the facts. This isn't going to be any type of character assassination or character assessment on Tony Ferguson anyway. We want to, keep it to the facts. So what better person to bring in than Mike Dolce? Obviously, Mike, you've heard of Tony Ferguson, originally scheduled for this bout. It got canceled on April 18th. Tony went ahead and continued to make that cut on the 17th, citing himself that he cut 24 pounds in 4 days because it just made sense, according to Tony Ferguson. Of course, we're not going to tread too deep into those waters, but that was his official statement, Mike. He did officially make the weight. He showed it to us on social media. Now he's got to turn back around 3 weeks later and make the weight. Obviously, everybody knows your experience. You have plenty of experience from 135, 145 on up, in and out of the cage, helping people with their nutrition. Give us your reaction, I guess, to this news, and let's go from there.
Well, first, I think Tony's weight cut is indicative of his personality and his mentality. That's the most important factor for a professional athlete, specifically for a professional fighter. Tony Ferguson is a deep water type of athlete, and he's refining his ability to go into those deep waters. I think this weight cut 3 weeks ago allows Tony a mental advantage over his opposition, where Tony knows he's literally willing to risk his health and well-being in order to win. And we've seen Tony go through that many times inside the octagon. I don't see a negative impact on his performance as a result of the weight cut. I do think this, if nothing else, has steeled his own iron will to go out there and compete against someone like Justin Gaethje, who's a violent man, who's a great fighter, who's a scary man in many ways. And I see lots of elite athletes like Tony Ferguson put challenges along the way, making the process even more difficult, essentially testing themselves to make sure that their merit is still there. And I think Tony has passed all of these challenges with flying colors. I mean, think about just the change of opponent, change of date, location. I mean, so many things have changed about this, but I think a guy like Tony has proven that he's adaptable and he's ready to get in there and pull out victory regardless of the circumstances.
Awesome, Mike. So in other words, again, you're no stranger to peak performance, what that means, and getting an athlete to their peak performance. Obviously, this game is very much mental. Even though your skills are advertised as far as the physical, the facts, what the scale says, you're obviously a fighter. You've been in these deep camps. You know the mental side of it. So pretty much what you're saying, what I'm getting is that mentally he didn't take a break from peaking, whereas if you get the exercise or the nutrition part, that could kind of falter your peak, much less a mental falter, which we could argue is even stronger than the previously mentioned one. So what you're saying is that by Tony keeping course, he didn't really have to get off course at all. He was able to stay mentally strong. But as far as the physical side, you also think that there won't be any negatives as far as that goes, assuming he's doing a quote unquote proper cut.
Well, and that's the question, because I don't know exactly what Tony did, so I can't speak to his process. And it's not just the ability to drop the weight and make the weight, but it's the managing of the rehydration, ensuring Tony has everything he needs on a physiological level in order to maintain or reclaim a balance of homeostasis, to make sure the biological organism is now perfectly prepared and ready to continue training. Because 3 weeks out, that's really where the peaking phase begins for most athletes. If these mixed martial artists are training properly, they're employing 2020 protocols as far as science and performance science really should say. About 21 days out is where the peaking phase begins. We'll take that 21-day period, we'll cut that down into 21 days, down to 10 days, down to 5 days, to 3 days, and then it's every 12 hours we start to tweak the peak as we go through. Tony, again, he had not a true peak with the weight cut. He dropped the weight, which I like, because Tony being 174, and I did want to speak to this, 174 4 days before 155, that aspect concerns me to a degree. Now, Tony's not a big man. He's a big lightweight, but he's not a big man. So if he's 179 pounds going into a 155 bout and he's losing those 24 pounds over a 4-day period, that's a little disconcerting, but that could be hyperbole. That could be a little poetic license. That could be some gamesmanship, and that could be fun. So I don't know that I will truly accept that he was 179, wake up weight first thing in the morning, dried out on the Tuesday before a Friday weigh-in. I don't necessarily know that's true because Tony is a consummate professional. I don't know that Tony regularly shows up for UFC fight weeks that far above his weight class. Now, you show up at 179 for a 155 bout, you're going to have Jeff Nowitzki is basically going to pull out a cot and move into your hotel room. So I don't know exactly that's true. If that is true, that would be the most disconcerting thing about this. Not the cut itself, but that he was so heavy so early. But then this cut could have been a godsend. If he was that heavy, he brought his weight down to 55, we would refill, bring him back up, essentially probably to, that 168, 172 region and let him float and balance there. Remember I said, the peaking phase for those first 11 days to get that balance, and then we would start that 10-day drop once again, going more from like a 168 to a 155, making his second cut not even a cut anymore. Then it just becomes a very soft landing. Instead of a check mark, you have more of a sweeping U bottom instead of that V bottom. Now, we work with also, D1 collegiate wrestlers. These guys and gals, they're cutting 2, 3, 4 times a week. They're cutting multiple times in a weekend. And this is the mental toughness. It doesn't adversely affect the wrestlers. They go and win national champions. They go on to become All-Americans. They're cutting weight 20, 30, 40 times during a 2, 3, 4 month season. We're only worried about Tony cutting twice over 3 weeks. So let's put things in context here. And this does pull from my experience, right? Because we've been doing this a really long time in all different sports, a multitude of sports. And that's just a little bit more context.
Awesome. And this is great context. So since you're providing such great context, Mike, let me ask you one more question that will take us a little further down the speculation theory. But
Sure.
As far as that, peaking, repeaking, rehydrating, repacking, does the fact that, because you mentioned Tony, he's a tall lightweight, he's a long lightweight, in no way are we calling him a small man in that sense, but like you said, frame-wise, he's not like a Tyron Woodley packing muscle. That muscle doesn't have maybe the same rehydration demands, and of course, Tony Ferguson is much more of a cardiovascular output kind of athlete, his fighting style, etc. Being a high cardio guy, both in training and in the cage, if you will, would that make it easier for athletes with your experience to maintain this kind of said weight?
To be walking around lighter, is that what you mean?
Yeah, not having to, with the worry of playing with the science as far as repacking, how much we had to play with what's going to be releasing to repacking as far as that goes.
Yeah, I think every athlete should be, over the years, we've come up with some pretty specific protocols, and just based upon the metrics. I mean, I have data on every single athlete I've ever worked with. All of their data, their body weight, their blood work, their bowel movements even, how much weight they cut, the amount of weight they would lose per minute during cuts at altitude, at sea level, in Brazil in the winter, and in Las Vegas in the summer. We have all that data and all that those metrics. What we've found, the athletes who compete at the highest levels of their potential, and the potential is different, like a GSP has a certain potential preset, and another athlete might not have that, but a GSP can underperform his potential preset, and another athlete can overperform or maximize theirs. Now, it doesn't mean they might beat GSP, but our goal is to get every athlete to utilize, and we can't say overperform their preset because there is a limited ceiling built in. But with that being said, we found the athletes who live and breathe and walk around closer to competition weight are the athletes who perform better. the athletes who do get closer to their genetic potential, if you will, they are able to compete at high velocity during multi-round fights, round 3, round 4, round 5. How many athletes, and I can think of some great athletes that they're 7-minute athletes. Chael Sonnen said, within 7 minutes, you know who's trained and who hasn't trained. You can get through the first 7 minutes of a fight based upon adrenaline and raw talent. After minute 7, you see athletes, second round, they start to bonk out. Third round, another athlete will steal it away because they're not even as good. Round 1 is usually for the genetic superior. Round 3 is for the athlete who's come closer to their genetic potential. So now back to Tony. With that being said, and again, I can't speak to Tony, so this is a little conjecture here, excuse me. I don't know Tony on a personal level. I've never seen his blood work and all those other things, excuse me. Phone's blowing up. They think they know I'm talking to Dan Tom of MMA Junkie right now. But that being said, I would theorize that Tony walking around leaner and lighter, more durable, more adaptable, not having to worry about it. I mean, because that's if he's losing 24 pounds in 4 days, that's a 24-pound water cut. That is literally 3 gallons of water he has to squeeze out of his body. And use that visual right there. He has to somehow squeeze 3 gallons of water from his body. That you cannot do that healthy. You can mitigate risk, you can mediate the damage, but the totality of that process is not a healthy process. We know the healthier the athlete, the greater levels the athlete can perform, and the more stress the athlete can actually endure during that period of time. So again, if Tony's weight, if that 179 is accurate, that 179 turns into 169, 170 or so. Now we're talking about a 15-pound swing, which is a 10% cap. And what our data shows, the athletes who live within that 10% cap of their competition weight by far outperform the athletes who don't, who roller coaster or zigzag high and low. Once we eliminate this zigzag, and we kind of keep it a little more balanced, it becomes very easy to manage their weight, also to enhance performance, because now the athlete doesn't spend bulk of their training time losing weight. And I'll finish on this. Many athletes, their training camp becomes a weight cut camp, a weight loss camp. We hear it all the time. The athlete then, 8 weeks before the fight, they stop getting better as an athlete, and they simply have to lose weight. If the athletes would take the 52 weeks before the fight mentality, be professionals 52 weeks before the fight, get their weight into a manageable range, then every single day, every session of training camp, they can keep getting better and not worry about their weight, because the weight becomes very easy to pull off at the end if everything is done correctly.
I like that 7 minutes example. I also like the context as far as the person doing the discipline. Again, people who have followed your work, you reference as far as lifestyle, you use that word a lot. And I think that for any criticisms or speculations anyone can levy Tony Ferguson's way, I think one thing we can all agree on is the guy is dedicated and disciplined. So very great points there, Mike. Thank you. Before we get out of here, I also got to ask you about the co-main event. Not as big of a storyline weight cutting wise. Dominick Cruz, like Tony Ferguson, has never had trouble making the weight, albeit Dominick Cruz, I would argue, is still a big bantamweight, even for this era. Dominick Cruz obviously coming off a layoff. He is 34, going to be going on 35. I was also born in 1985, so I'm not trying to come at his age there. Sure. And nor am I going to come at a former client's age of yours, who I also like, Manny Gambirian. Of course, Manny was a WEC vet, an experienced fighter who decided later in his career he wanted to go try 135. Granted, Manny was more maybe of a power athlete, is easy to argue, than Dominick Cruz. Apples to oranges. But I'm going to ask you, Mr. Dolce, to speculate once again. Is there any kind of things that, Dominick Cruz, and not that you're telling him what to do or telling us what to think, but anything maybe we should be aware of in this kind of scenario from your experience?
Well, I think the age factor for Dominick Cruz is a non-issue because, again, looking at our data, we see mixed martial arts typically hit their peak in their early through mid-30s. That's when a mixed martial artist really hits their stride and has their career-defining performances. This very well could be a career-defining performance for Dominick Cruz. That being said, the time out of the octagon not from a ring rust perspective, the time out of the octagon from a weight reduction perspective. That's the one challenge I believe Dominic has to face, because I don't know that Dominic has dropped down to 135 since his last weigh-in. Why would he? Now, I'm friends with Dom. Dom's a smart guy. Dom's a hardworking guy. There's no break in Dominic Cruz. Dominic will make the weight. It might be harder than he's anticipating, though he's a cerebral athlete. I believe he's already hedged the additional challenge into his weight cut. I would assume Dominic already knows it's going to come up a little slower. It's going to be a little harder. He's going to have to dig a little deeper in the process. If he's already built that expectation in, it shouldn't be an issue at all. But I would have to say it will be more challenging simply because it's the first time getting back under the wire. He's got to really, kind of sneak and slide under that wire, because Dom's a big 35-pounder too. Don't forget, Dom's a tall guy for the weight class. He's got a lot of muscle mass on his physique, on his frame, and he hasn't reduced his body weight in a pretty long period of time. Outside of that, Dom had said there's no such thing as ring rust, right? You get in there, you fight, you do the thing. And I do believe that. And Ryan the Lion Schultz of the Team Quest days, he's a great story here. We were spending so much time in training camps and peaking for a fight, and guys turning down fights because it wasn't enough time. And I was in the bathroom just kind of after training session getting, cleaned up. And Schultz, he looks at me and goes, "Hey, Dolce, if someone broke into your house, would you say, hey, time out, I haven't had a training camp for this? Or would you go and beat those motherfuckers for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever you had to do? Would you even think about gassing out?" I was like, "No fucking way." And he's like, "This training camp shit's bullshit. Just go fucking fight." And that mentality right there is true. And this kind of goes back to the Dom Cruz ring rust. Now, you're fighting professional mixed martial arts. You want to make sure your timing's good, skill sets. So that's, we want to make sure we're pretty sharp. We know our transitions. We know our routes. We have our game plan. We can get Greg Jackson to talk, or Eric Del Fiero, who's likely with Dom and whatnot. But at the same time, it's a fucking fist fight, pardon my language, against someone who is trying to steal your soul, trying to take money from your family. And I'm only saying that because I've sat with Dom at dinner. I've sat in the car. I've sat on planes with Dom. He's a crazy motherfucker. Dominic Cruz, he's ready to go out there and steal your fucking soul. I don't think that'll be an issue. The one issue I have that I'm not worried about Dom, that I note, is it's his first time touching 35 again in a while. I think once he gets this one under his belt, he goes out there, he beats Cejudo, he comes back, he fights in, 4, 5, 6 months or so, fingers crossed, get him active. Each time he makes it, it'll be so much easier.
Yeah, and again, maybe this is just, more conjecture on my part, but kind of to the Tony Ferguson and cardio nod, you spoke that some fighters can fall into the trap of spending their whole camp to make a weight. I got to imagine it's easier to do double delegation, killing two birds with one stone, if you will, if your fighter's fight style is already cardio-based. I'm sure that doesn't hurt the weight maintenance process, right, Mike? That's
a great point. And someone like Dom, he's on his feet constantly. He's always moving. He's always dancing. He's always putting in that cardio style training. Dom is one of the guys I would say might train too much. He might train too much, but how can you argue with an athlete? Dom, he's a Hall of Famer. He hasn't been nearly as active as we wish he could have been, but he's still a Hall of Famer. Right? Win or lose this fight, Dominic Cruz will eventually be in the UFC, WEC Hall of Fame for the totality of his career accomplishments. But I really do hope that we see a very healthy Dominic Cruz get out there. He's fighting Henry Cejudo, which this is an exciting fight. It's an exciting matchup. I'm not going to do a commentary quite on this. I'm pumped up for this fight, but I really would like to see Dom come out. I'd like to see a stellar performance from Dom, and I love to see him active. I'd love to see him get 2 fights in within the net before the end of the year. I'd love to see him get a late summer fight, an early winter fight, and I'd really love to see Dominic Cruz get a good, 4, 5, 6 fights in before likely 38 years old, and I would assume he's going to walk away, hopefully with a big pile of money under his bed.
I agree. I would love to see a healthy performance from Cruz, Tony, and I think health in general is going to be an underlining theme of the card. We want everybody to be healthy and have healthy performances. Mike, this was awesome. Thank you for your time and your knowledge and just sharing your experiences with us today on the subject.
Yep. Dan, always a pleasure. Always happy to be here. Love MMA Junkie and what you guys do. And, I'm before anything else, I'm a fan of MMA. I'm just blessed that I have the opportunity to work inside the industry. So it's always a pleasure to be on and talking to you.
Awesome, thank you. And for those that are listening to this via my podcast, make sure, again, you go to thedolcediet.com. Follow Mike Dolce at The Dolce Diet for all the official news and announcements. And if you want to buy his literature, which, believe me, as an amateur competitor at the cut weight for both combat sports and grappling, this was useful for me and my buddies, whether we're talking about living lean. I know you've had things that have come out since then, like the Dolce Diet, College Diet guide. Of course, the classic 3 weeks to shred it. I mean, we were talking a lot about 3-week windows here today, folks. Kind of get that full knowledge. And a lot of places you can buy these, of course, official retailers. But if you want to do it through Amazon, don't be shy to go through the host of my podcast, protectyourneckpodcast.com. That's mixedmartialanalyst.com. You got an Amazon banner you can click through. It doesn't cost you any extra. Allows me to wet my beak a little. Everybody wins. And but honestly, follow Mike Dolce. He is the truth.
I appreciate that, brother.
Hey, thanks, Mike. You have a great time. Thank you again for your time today.
You too, Dan. Thank you.
Easy.